On my coronation day, with Aslan's approval, I swore an oath that, if once I established peace in Narnia, I would set sail myself for a year and a day to find my father's friends, or to learn of their deaths, and avenge them if I could. These were their names: Lord Revilian, the Lord Bern, Lord Argos, and Lord Mavramorn, the Lord Octasian, the Lord Restamar, and, oh, the other one who's so hard to remember. The Lord Roop, sire, said Drinian. Roop, of course, said Caspian. That is my main intention. But Reepicheep here has an even higher hope. Everyone's eyes turned to the mouse. As high as my spirit, it said, though perhaps as small as my stature, why should we not come to the very eastern end of the world? And what might we find there? I expect to find Aslan's own country. It is always from the east, across the sea, that the great lion comes to see us. I say, that is an idea, said Edmund, in an odd voice. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Faithful Fables. Hope you had a good new year, and here we are. We're back at it. And new year, new book that we're looking at as well. And I just have one question for you guys. Well, okay, a couple questions. Are you ready for a new adventure? Or maybe I should say, are you ready for a voyage? Are you ready to be rocking back and forth on the bluish-greenish waves of the Narnian seas? Because in this episode, we are starting our voyage. The voyage of the Dawn Treader. We're going to be looking at Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. And before we get into it, I just want to remind you guys, leave a comment and a rating, and that'll help get the episode out to more people. And I actually want to announce Faithful Fables is now an ambassador for Free Luma bracelets. Free Luma is a company that makes Christian bracelets that have NFC readers in them. What this means is you can scan the bracelet with your phone and it will open up a portal to daily scripture, inspiration, mental health support, and also a community of fellow believers that you can interact with. I think this is a great way to get daily scripture into your life and to develop a good habit. We're all on our phones anyways, right? So use code STAYFAITHFUL, that's one word, capital S, capital F, at checkout for 15% off your order. This is a great way to support a Christian business and as well as support Faithful Fables. Again, that's code STAYFAITHFUL at checkout. Now, I'm not going to bother you with this any further. Let's get into this. So, for this series of episodes, I'm going to do something a little bit different where every episode will be kind of one stop along the voyage. They travel to different places along the way. And so we're going to just tackle it that way instead of how we've been doing the episodes normally. Let's get into this. So for some context, there are many islands in Narnia that have been undiscovered for thousands of years. And the truth is, some of the most wonderful places in Narnia are off the map and beyond the horizon of the Eastern Ocean. So in the days of High King Peter and his siblings, the Narnian people were seafarers and had many adventures on the sea. The ship that they used at the time was the Splendor Hyaline that carried them as far south as the city of Tashbaan. Now, generations later, Narnia had completely abandoned the seafaring lifestyle and the sea altogether, and this was because the Telmarines were afraid of the sea. As a result, the Narnians forgot how to build ships. So in an attempt to keep complete power for himself, Miraz sent away 7 noble lords who were friends with King Caspian the Ninth, and they would also challenge his power. And so he sent them away on a journey to discover unknown lands. And unfortunately, these 7 lords never returned. But then when Caspian got the throne back from his uncle, they started to now learn these skills once again. So Caspian was also lucky that Dr. Cornelius was secretly teaching him the necessary skills that he would need, and that included shipbuilding and navigation. Now, I don't think that Dr. Cornelius knew at the time that he would need these skills, so that he could fulfill this oath to Aslan, because on his coronation day, Caspian promised Aslan that he would set sail for a year and a day to find the fate of the 7 lost lords. And so in those 3 years of making peace in Narnia again, Caspian was building ships, and the best ship that he ever built was the Dawn Treader, and it actually became legendary. So now I want to go through a little bit and talk about the Dawn Treader itself. So the Dawn Treader is a Narnian ship. It was built by King Caspian. It is shaped like a dragon's head. Its sides are green and has a gilded prow and stern. She has a square sail made of a rich purple and is rigged to its one mast. Caspian's cabin is a bit small, but it is decorated in a beautiful Chinese style, having birds, beasts, vines, and crimson dragons on painted panels. There's a flat gold image of Aslan that is in the space above the door. The ship had 2 long hatches, one fore and one toward the rear of the mast. It had benches for rowing. There was a pit reaching down to the keel, which lines in the center of the ship and holds provisions. The crew consisted of 30 swordsmen and was commanded by Lord Drinian, his first mate Rince, and Reepicheep. Now the ship was not rowed by slaves. C.S. Lewis made a mention of that. It wasn't rowed by slaves. Everyone took a turn, except, of course, for Reepicheep because his legs were too short. All right, now I also want to take a look at some ship terms that may be used throughout the episodes here and there. And honestly, as I was reading the book, had to look some of these things up as well, just because if you're not really familiar with it, these terms don't really mean much. So we'll start with the word port. Now, port is the left side of the ship. Starboard is the right side. Now, a sail, this might be an obvious one, but a sail is a piece of material extended on a mast to catch the wind and propel the boat or ship. The mast is a tall upright post. The hatches are an opening of restricted size, allowing for passage from one area to another. A pit is a key operational area, often located near the mast. The keel is a main structural backbone of the ship, running lengthwise along the bottom center of the hull from the bow to stern. Now, the hull is the main watertight body or shell that provides buoyancy, allowing the vessel to float. We're going through these kind of fast. I'm sorry. The bow is the front of the ship. It is designed to cut through water as the vessel moves forward, acting as the sharp end that reduces resistances? Yeah, for efficient movement and stability. Now the stern is the rear. So the bow is the front, stern is the rear, or the back of the ship. All right. With that being said, I know that was fast, but with that being said, let's raise anchor and set sail on a voyage that we won't soon forget. The voyage of the Dawn Treader began in the Narnian city of Cair Paravel. The plan was to start the search for the 7 lost lords that in the islands that were known to them in the region. There were 4 islands that were known to them in what is called the Bight of Calormen, now a gentle curve or recess in a coastline forming a large and often shallow bay. The Bight of Calormen was massive, and it stretched from the northeast corner of the wildlands of the north to the southeastern corner of the Calormen Peninsula. No one, not even the people that lived on these islands, knew what was east of this, and it was completely unknown. The 4 islands in the Bight were the 7 Isles, Galma, Terebinthia, and the Lone Islands. In the Prince Caspian book, Lucy actually remembers and names these islands as they reminisce on their past lives in Narnia. And so the first stop on their journey is the island of Galma. Galma is an island that is located nearest to Narnia, only a day's voyage, and is actually an independent dukedom. They seem to have kept their distance from Narnia during the reign of Miraz, but they are pleased to have King Caspian arrive on the island, so much so that they hosted a week-long jousting tournament in his honor. This was an attempt to interest Caspian in marrying the duke's daughter. Simply, she wasn't the one. As Caspian put it, she squints and has freckles. Poor girl. I guess that's not his type. The people of Galma were known for their nautical expertise. And since Miraz had rid Narnia of any nautical practices, it was the Galmans who provided the 7 noble lords with a ship. And so after stopping here, we will set sail for the next island in the Bight. The next stop in the Bight is the island of Terebinthia. This is the southern island who is closest to the borders of Archenland and Calormen. Now, we can't land the ship here because there is a disease outbreak in Terebinthia. And we also encountered some pirates after going around the cave. So the theory here is that because the Narnian Navy was disbanded, that also allowed pirates to now thrive and flourish in this part of the sea. And so, since we couldn't stop here, we will continue on to what is known as the 7 Isles. The 7 Isles is an archipelago, which is just a group of islands, and this is off the coast of the territory of Ettinsmore. It is located in the northernmost part of the Bight. The 2 major islands are known as Mule, the westernmost, and Bern, which is the home of the port city of Redhaven, which is the capital. The people of Redhaven were very hospitable and feasted the crew very well. The other 5 islands were not named, so we just know the 2 of Mule and Bren. Now, to get to our next stop, we have to take a long route to the south in order to reach the Lone Islands. The Lone Islands are located at the very end of the Bight and where the beginning of the great Eastern Ocean is. No one knew what was beyond this. This is even on the map. All that they knew was the lone islands and then the ocean. They know nothing past this. So the lone islands were another archipelago, and this had 3 islands called Felamath, Avra, and Dorn. Dorn was also the capital and the main settlement called Narrowhaven. Now, halfway to the lone islands, something interesting happened. Back in England, 1 Earth year after the events in Prince Caspian, Lucy and Edmund are staying at their Uncle Harold and Aunt Alberta's house with their cousin Eustace. Eustace Clarence Scrubb, a name that he well deserved, was an only child. His parents had an untraditional way of raising him, and he fell victim to that. His upbringing stunted his imagination since it was clear he had little sense of adventure. Eustace is a precious and obnoxious 9-year-old who had no friends. He also called his parents by their first names. Eustace liked animals, especially beetles, but as long as they were dead and pinned on a card. He enjoyed books that had information and had pictures of grain elevators or fat foreign children doing exercises in model schools. Eustace disliked his cousins, Edmund and Lucy, but he was glad that they were coming to stay with them because he liked bullying, and having them stay at his place, he would have the home court advantage over his cousins. But in reality, he couldn't stand up to Lucy, let alone Edmund, in a fight. Edmund and Lucy didn't want to stay there, but they had to. Their father got a job in America, teaching for the summer. Their mother also went with for a well-deserved vacation. Their brother Peter was working on an exam and was spending the summer being coached by Professor Diggory Kirk. If Diggory was still in the mansion they all stayed at, in Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, they could have all stayed there. But he had become poor since then and lived in a small cottage with only 1 spare room. Their sister Susan went to America with their parents, and it would have cost too much to take the other 3 as well. Grown-ups thought that Susan was the pretty one of the family. She also was not good at schoolwork. Their mother thought that a trip to America would be better for her than the youngsters. Edmund and Lucy tried to not hold a grudge on Susan for her being lucky. Edmund said that he would have it worse in his living arrangement than Lucy because he had to share a room with Eustace, who he called a record stinker, and Lucy would have her own room. Now Edmund and Lucy were talking about Narnia in some precious moments they had alone. They were in Lucy's room, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at a picture on the opposite wall. It was the only picture in the entire house that they liked. It was up in Lucy's room because Aunt Alberta didn't like it. She couldn't get rid of it though, because it was a wedding gift from someone that she would rather not offend. This picture was of a ship, and this made Edmund miss Narnia even more because it felt like looking at a Narnian ship. To this, Lucy says that even looking at this picture was better than nothing when it came to Narnia. Eustace had been listening in on them from outside the room, came in and teased them about Narnia. Last year, he had stayed with them and heard them talking about Narnia, and he teased them then too. C.S. Lewis tells us the reason why Eustace did this. Quote, he thought, of course, that they were making it all up, and as he was too stupid to make anything up himself, he did not approve of that. He even teased them with a limerick, rhyming Narnia with Balmere. And Lucy points out that that doesn't rhyme. to which he says it's an assonance. Eustace has to always be right and know more than the next person. Edmund tells Lucy to not ask him what an assy thingy-gummy is. Edmund is doing everything he can to not beat Eustace up. Edmund really tried to get Eustace to leave the room. The effect that Eustace had on Edmund stripped Edmund of his kingliness. He almost seemed like the Edmund before Aslan saved him. Lucy was still pure in heart, as she always had been. And even though Eustace was being a jerk, she still wanted to engage with her cousin, even if Edmund desperately didn't want to himself. Lucy points out that the ship looks like it's moving up and down. The look of the waves moving made Eustace feel sick, and then all three were staring at it with their mouths open. What they were seeing may be hard to believe when you read it in print, but it was almost as hard to believe when you saw it happening. The things in the picture were moving. It didn't look at all like a cinema either. The colors were too real and clean and out of doors for that. Down went the prow of the ship into the wave, and up went a great shock of spray. And then up went the wave behind her, and the stern and the deck became visible for the first time, and then disappeared as the next wave came to meet her, and the bows went up again. At the same moment, an exercise book which had been laying beside Edmund on the bed flapped, rose and sailed through the air to the wall behind him, and Lucy felt all her hair whipping round her face as it does on a windy day. And this was a windy day, but the wind was blowing out of the picture toward them, and suddenly, with the wind came the noises, the swishing of waves, and the slap of the water against the ship's sides, and the creaking, and the overall high, steady roar of the air and water. But it was the smell, the wild, briny smell, which really convinced Lucy that she was not dreaming. "Stop it!" came Eustace's voice, squeaky with fright and bad temper. "It's some silly trick you two are playing. Stop it! I'll tell Alberta." "Ow!" The other two were much more accustomed to adventures. But just exactly as Eustace Clarence said "ow," they both said "ow" too. The reason was that a great cold salt splash had broken right out of the frame, and they were breathless from the smack of it, besides being wet through. "I'll smash the rotten thing," cried Eustace, and then several things happened at the same time. Eustace rushed towards the picture. Edmund, who knew something about magic, sprang up after him, warning him to look out and not to be a fool. Lucy grabbed at him from the other side and was dragged forward. And by this time, either they had grown much smaller or the picture had grown bigger. Eustace jumped to try to pull it off the wall and found himself standing on the frame. In front of him was not glass but real sea, and wind, and waves rushing up to the frame as they might to a rock. He lost his head and clutched at the other two who had jumped up beside him. There was a second of struggling and shouting, and just as they thought they had got their balance, a great blue roller surged up round them, swept them off their feet, and drew them down into the sea. Eustace's despairing cry suddenly ended as the water got into his mouth. All right, so we are now caught up. And I mean, halfway to the Lone Islands, what happened was Lucy, Edmund, and Eustace from England end up basically coming into a picture on the wall and now into Narnia. Remember, in an earlier book, Aslan did tell them that they will never come into Narnia the same way twice, right? So in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, obviously they went into this wardrobe, and then in Prince Caspian, they were at a train stop, a train platform, on the way to boarding school, and now it's a picture on the wall at their aunt's house. And so we're also introduced to a brand new character here. As I mentioned earlier, Eustace is, he's a character. And he will continue to be a character as we go. But yeah, we are basically, the two stories are caught up, where like the book starts with this in England and then them coming to Narnia, but there is a sub story happening at the same time. And for the purpose of this episode, wanted to kind of give that backstory of where the crew of the Dawn Treader has been to this point. And now we're all caught up, and here we are. So that being said, I do like that they were standing on the frame of the picture. And that it's like either the frame got really big or they got really small. But either way, I think it's really cool because in the movie, it's portrayed much differently. And I mean, I gotta say, out of the 3 movies that they made, this one for Voyage of the Dawn Treader, probably not the best one. But regardless, how it's portrayed in this movie is that the room basically fills up with water. So like the water from the picture kind of pours out into the room. The entire room is filled up with water. Next thing you know, they are transitioned into Narnia. But I do like it better that, you see them standing on the frame. And I think it's just really nice how it was written, because it's almost like they were in between the two worlds for a while, right? And so once they're in the water, Lucy is actually, like, one of the first things she thinks of is that she is thankful that she worked on her swimming. And it's good because she would now need that skill. And so she starts swimming towards the ship from the picture that is now right in front of them in real life. And people on the ship see her swimming towards them. And of course, Eustace, he's freaking out. He grabs onto her and they both go under the water. And see, he was struggling in the water. He probably doesn't know how to swim. And so he grabbed Lucy, but it only made it worse. And when they come back up for a bit, she sees a white figure diving off of the boat into the sea, or off the ship into the sea. And so then in the water, Edmund and this stranger tie ropes around her, and the crew pulls her back on board. And all she has was a bruised knee. And at first I thought, like, why would just mention that she just has a bruised knee? Like, but then you think about it and it's like, okay, you have ropes tied around you and you're being pulled up on board of a ship. Like, you're probably going to be slapping around and hitting the side of the ship and all that. And I guess for her to only have a bruised knee is probably a good thing. And so then Edmund and then Eustace are also pulled up, and then the stranger. And the stranger is revealed to be Caspian, because of course this ship is none other than the Dawn Treader. Had it been any other ship, like a pirate ship or something, this story would have been much different, but that's also not how this works. And, it could have been any other crew member that jumped in to save them, but it was Caspian, the king of all people. And this is just the kind of guy that Caspian is. A king would never have to do something like that. He would send someone else or whatever, but Caspian is the kind of king that would sacrifice himself for the good of others. And, we don't even know for sure if the crew members on the ship knew who was in the water. I mean, it could have been anyone that but it was Caspian that dived in to save them anyways. Now, Caspian had made peace in Narnia and now had people like Drinian around him who loved him and respected him and pushed him to be a better king. Caspian also respected and loved Drinian, and as we'll see throughout this voyage, he often defers to Drinian for advice. And I also wonder if, from the ship's perspective, they saw the three of them coming from that bedroom into Narnia. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't say, but I wonder if all of a sudden they saw this giant opening in the sky. They see this picture frame or whatever, and maybe even get a glimpse into Lucy's bedroom in England. Like, I'm not sure, but I wonder. I do feel like if they did see it, they might have mentioned it, but the book is unclear. It's just kind of something to think about. But Eustace was instantly afraid, and the book says he was crying more than a boy his age ought to be crying for only being wet. Because really, he was only wet. And he wanted to go back home. And you know what? On some level, I don't really blame him for crying so much. Like, yes, he was only wet, but having never experienced magic and having no idea what is happening, I personally can imagine that he's terribly overwhelmed, because I would probably as well. I would have no idea what's happening. You know, all of a sudden you're shrunk down and oh man, just that whole, like, I don't blame him on one hand. So Eustace was disgusted with the size of Reepicheep. And again, don't really blame him. Like, a mouse that's like a foot tall with a sword, I'd be scared too. Reepicheep himself said that if Eustace wasn't there, wasn't under the protection and the family, part of the family of the Queen, Lucy, that he would have done something to him. There was this instant tension between Eustace and Reepicheep. And Lucy, of course, as mentioned in Prince Caspian already too, she always wanted to cuddle Reepicheep, but she never could. And she had this desire to do that here as well. And since Lucy was now the only woman on board, Caspian gave her his room. And he gave her some dry clothes and some shoes. And the thing is, they were Caspian's clothes and shoes, and so they were too big for her. It was just interesting because without hesitation, Caspian and the crew treated her like the lady that she was. And I mean, I guess they knew that she was the queen as well, and so that's some aspect of it. But I feel like even if she wasn't, that's how they would have been treating her. And so with all of this kind of happening, I do see something that reminds me of scripture. And so in Philippians 4 verse 8, it says, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things." Now, the reason I brought this up, Eustace was miserable. You know, they're pulled on board and he's wet and overwhelmed, but he may have been overdoing it just a little bit. You know, the crew gave them all something to drink, which would help them with certain things they were experiencing. And Eustace just made a face and spat it out, and he was sick. And I mean, hey, look, even if you don't like it, that's not really the most respectful response. He's caught up in the opposites of the things in Philippians 4:8. He has an anxious and selfish thought spiral. So he was selfish and smug. He was a selfish and smug person to begin with, is what I mean. And now when things aren't going his way, he can't control it for sure. Like, not, I don't know if he did before, it doesn't sound like it, but for sure not now. The way his parents raised him, he was used to things, or he was used to his needs being attended for, but even when the crew tried, he seemed to reject it out of his pride and arrogance. Now, Lucy, on the other hand, ever the optimist, this girl, such a strong character in Narnia, she handled things very differently. And when they fall into the water, one of the first things is that she's glad she improved her swimming. Now, on deck, she is also sick and sneezing just as much as Eustace. And when she is given Caspian's cabin and spare clothes, yes, they were too big for her, but she said that she would manage. Optimistic. The shoes were also too big, but she also was okay going barefoot on deck. She takes a long, deep breath and says she's sure they are going to have a lovely time. Now, these trials seem to be part of the fun for Lucy. She was thinking about the things in Philippians 4:8. I also see her fitting well with what Paul says a little later in that same chapter, in verse 11, that says, "Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am in to be content." Now, is that not true for Lucy here? I mean, in whatever circumstance she's in, she seems to be content. I mean, she also probably knew that she was in Narnia, and she's always excited for that, but she wasn't freaking out. She wasn't like Eustace, basically, and the clothes were too big. Oh, I'll make do. The shoes are too big. Oh, that's okay. I can go barefoot. And, she takes a deep breath and she's sure that they're in for a lovely time. I think that's a good example to learn from right there. And it's easier said than done, but my goodness, what a example. So at this point, they were already at sea for nearly 30 days. Not the Pevensies and Eustace, but the rest of the crew. They were nearly 30 days at sea and 4,000 leagues from Narnia at this point. Now, I looked it up, and 4,000 nautical leagues is about 22,224 kilometers. Eustace went to lay in bed because of the way Eustace was behaving. Edmund had pointed out that there was nothing they could do for him. Being nice to Eustace just made it worse. I mean, again, Eustace in his pride was making things more difficult, not only for himself, but also for the other crew members who were just trying to help and be nice to him. Now, of course, Eustace felt sick in his room. I mean, he's looking out a window of the waves. He could have gotten some fresh air on deck and maybe that would have helped him feel better, but no, he decided to wallow instead. And I think there's a lesson there too, but I'll let you guys think about that. Lucy wanted to see Eustace. He was seasick and, she's empathetic. She wants to help. And she wished that she had her magic cordial and because it would help him really. And lucky for her, Caspian actually brought it with, and it was on the ship. And so Lucy gets it and she goes to Eustace with it, but Eustace tells her to go away. Now, just imagine how frustrating this would be. But he does end up taking a drop from the cordial and his seasickness gets better. Unfortunately, the cordial cannot heal his poor personality, though. And as we learned in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that sort of thing, like a bad personality, bad attitude, that can really only be cured by Aslan, and of course, a willingness to see your mistake and make the change. Because we saw that with Edmund before. Now, Eustace threatens to lodge a disposition against them with the British Council. This dude, or the British Consul, this dude really doesn't know where he is. he thinks they're still in England somewhere, and like he's being kidnapped or something. And so they tell Eustace the reality that there is literally, they have no way of sending him home, because I mean that's not how Narnia works. You go home when you're supposed to go home. So Edmund and Lucy, they loved the Dawn Treader, which of course Eustace hated it, but Lucy, she fed the hens and enjoyed it. Like, she's, again, content. She's making the most of it. And when they do get their clothes back, now dry, Eustace took out his notebook. You see, Eustace kept a notebook on him to keep track of his grades in school, and he would use this to annoy the other kids with it. Like, just imagine this kid. Like, maybe we all knew somebody like this or not, I don't know, but I could not put up with this kid. But now, with this turn of events, he started to keep a diary instead. And now I want to actually read you the first diary entry that we see. The book has a couple. I'm going to read you the first one. August 7th. Have now been 24 hours on this ghastly boat, if it isn't a dream. All the time, a frightful storm has been raging. It's a good thing I'm not seasick. Huge waves keep coming up in over the front, and I have seen the boat nearly go under any number of times. All the others pretend to take no notice of this, either from swank or because Harold says one of the most cowardly things ordinary people do is to shut their eyes to facts. It's madness to come out into the sea in a rotten little thing like this. Not much bigger than a lifeboat, and, of course, absolutely primitive indoors. No proper saloon, no radio, no bathrooms, no deck chairs. I was dragged all over it yesterday evening, and it would make anyone sick to hear Caspian showing off his funny little toy boat as if it was the Queen Mary. I tried to tell him what real ships are like, but he's too dense. E and L, of course, didn't back me up. I suppose a kid like L doesn't realize the danger, and E is buttering up C, as everyone does here. They call him a king. I said I was a Republican, and he had asked me what that meant. He doesn't seem to know anything at all. Needless to say, I have been put in the worst cabin of the boat. A perfect dungeon, and Lucy has been given a whole room under the deck to herself. Almost a nice room compared to the rest of this place. C says that's because she's a girl. I tried to make him see what Alberta says, that all that sort of thing is really lowering girls, but he was too dense. Still, he might see that I shall be ill if I'm kept in that hole any longer. E says we mustn't grumble because C is sharing it with us himself to make room for L. As if that didn't make it more crowded, and far worse. Nearly forgot to say that there is also a kind of mouse thing that gives everyone the most frightful cheek. The others can put up with it if they like, but I shall twist his tail pretty soon if he tries it on me. The food is frightful too. So we are really starting to get to know Eustace as a character. And I think I'm better understanding why Edmund had such a hard time with him, but also why Lucy had the sort of empathy that she had toward him. But I think, he thinks that they're in a raging storm, although as we read later, the weather was actually perfect for sailing. But he's interpreting it wrong. He doesn't think that being an ordinary person is a good thing and that everyone else just shuts their eyes to the facts. He's kind of spewing what his parents have taught him. And the reality is that Eustace was actually closing his eyes to the facts about their situation. He thinks that everyone on board is, just primitive, and that the whole ship itself is primitive. He also knows that he is out of his element, but he thinks he deserves the best. He feels entitled. And these are likely some of the things he's learned from his parents and his upbringing. And so we see the tension between Eustace and Reepicheep taken to a whole new level after this. And Eustace wants to destroy Reepicheep. So Reepicheep liked to sit up by the dragon's head and sing a song that a dryad sang to him when he was a baby. And the song also prophesizes Reepicheep going to Aslan's country, which is actually, again, the main reason Reepicheep is on this voyage. And so the sailors liked when Reepicheep sat up there, because when they were on lookout duty, it gave them someone to talk to. And so Eustace saw his tail hanging down and grabbed it and swung him around by it. Reepicheep draws his little sword out while swinging in the air and jabs Eustace in the hand. Then he waved his sword around Eustace's stomach area, and he tells Eustace to draw a sword, but Eustace says that he's a pacifist. What? Wait. Eustace actually gives a bad name to us pacifists. Like, you can't say you're a pacifist, but you're swinging this guy around by his tail, trying to destroy him. What a guy. So Reepicheep gives Eustace blows to his side, with his sword, to try to teach Eustace some manners. Now, Eustace was not used to this sensation of being hit with the sword on his side, and he actually felt from this because he went to school that didn't have corporal punishment, so he wasn't used to it for that reason. Now, the issue here between them ends when everyone else took Reepicheep's suggestion for a duel seriously. Caspian even offered Eustace his sword, and Edmund and Captain Drinian even talked about a handicap for Eustace. So they were trying to help the guy. They're like, hey, here's my sword. And they're like, hey, we'll give you the advantage. But Eustace didn't want any of this and really didn't expect this. So he apologized sulkily and goes off with Lucy so he can have his hand taken care of. And he was also very careful not to lay on his side because of the sensation he got from Reepicheep's sword. So now, with all of this being said, we have finally made it to the Lone Islands. The Lone Islands have a long history in Narnia, and they've been under Narnian rule for 2,000 years, since King Gale conquered a dragon that was terrorizing the island. Now, if Caspian knew this history, it may have given us a clue for what was in store at our next stop, but more on that later. The Lone Islands were neglected during the time of Miraz, causing the island's castle to fall into despair, and for the country of Calormen to begin having a greater influence in the area. One of these influences included the act of slave trading, to the point that it was now a major part of the island's economy. The Lone Islands were also an archipelago that consisted of 3 islands, known as Felamath, Avra, and Durn. The White Witch had actually also been known as the Empress of the Lone Islands, but when Aslan defeated her, that title went to Peter, who was the High King. So that's a little history on the Lone Islands, and as we approach them, we can see Felamath and farther off Durn. Edmund and Lucy recognize and remember them from their time in Narnia previously. Now, Caspian is wondering why the lone islands belong to Narnia. And Edmund tells him that they belonged to Narnia even before their time. And C.S. Lewis, narrating the story, tells us that he doesn't know how they're Narnian, but if he finds out, and if the story is interesting, he will put it in another book. So the island of Felamath is uninhabited except for sheep and shepherds. It looks like a low green hill in the sea. Dorn has people, and so we will land on Dorn. It is also the most populated of the 3 islands. The capital and of the lone islands is Narrowhaven, and it is located on Dorn. The islands were so neglected in these days that cleanliness and courtesy are almost unknown because of the lack of Narnian influence. Now, Lucy could not wait to walk on Felamath again, so Caspian suggests that they take the boat to Felamath so that they can walk there and the Dawn Treader can pick them up on the other side. So Caspian, Reepicheep, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace all take the boat to Felamath. While walking on Felamath, they see some armed men. Caspian instructs them not to tell the men who they are because they wouldn't have heard from Narnia in a long time, and being the king would not be a good image right now. And so Caspian was smart for this because he was still fighting the reputation that his uncle had left. And so Reepicheep suggests that they have their swords out to fight, but Caspian tells him that if he has to conquer the islands, he would rather come with a bigger army. And so they talk to the men and ask if the lone islands still have a governor, and the men tell them that they do. And the governor is on Dorn. So the men invite Caspian and crew for a drink. They start to drink and suddenly find themselves wrapped in the men's arms, and everyone becomes bound except for Reepicheep, who is writhing in his captor's grip and biting him furiously. So the men say to be careful with Reepicheep because they'll get the most for him, as they were planning to sell everybody. Now these men were slave merchants, and Eustace, my man, just doesn't know how to shut up or when to shut up. He's just yapping away, and one of the other slavers says, "Well, I've had enough of this jabber. The mouse is a fair treat, but this one would talk the hind leg off a donkey." And so Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace were tied together, and Reepicheep was carried separately. And I'd like to share a quote from the book. "He stopped biting on threat of having his mouth tied up, but he had a great deal to say, and Lucy really wondered how any man could bear to have the things said to him which were said to the slave driver by the mouse, or the slave dealer by the mouse." I imagine if this was in a movie or on TV, Reepicheep they would be censoring and bleeping out his words, and you'd probably hear more bleeps than actual words. That's the vibe I get from this. And so the slaver kept egging him on, though, to the point where the number of things that Reepicheep thought of saying all at once nearly suffocated him, and he became silent. And the main slaver's name was Pug, and it seemed like he may have been lower class just by the way that he talked. It also probably didn't help that he was a pirate. But they got to the shore, and then another man approaches them and asks how much for Caspian. The slaver told him that it would be 300 crescents, but this man counter-offered with 150, and they agreed on that price. Now, this man must have been had some sort of influence, or I don't know, but he Pug seemed to have changed the way that he talked when he was talking to this man. And so even before he was about to be sold, Caspian still did not want to be known as the king. Lucy, in this moment, wanted to say something, but she sees Caspian's face and knew that even then, he did not want to be known. And this reminds me a little bit of Jesus when he waits to reveal who he is. It needed to be revealed when it was time. So Lucy begged them not to separate them all, but the man was only interested in purchasing Caspian. But the man tells the slavers to take care of the rest of them or it will be worse for them. He kind of threatens them a little bit. So as Caspian leaves with the other man, Lucy is crying and Edmund has a blank look on his face. Caspian says, "Cheer up. I'm sure it will all come right. I'm sure it will come all right in the end." And that just reminds me of Romans 8:28, when it says, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." In the same way, they love Aslan, and he will make this right one way or another. And so Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, and Reepicheep are on a slave ship, and Eustace is blaming everybody, of course. And they have no idea what's going on the outside of the ship. Caspian is brought to a village, and the man tells him that he bought him because he reminded him of King Caspian IX, which would have been Caspian's dad. So this was the perfect time for Caspian to reveal who he is. But the man doesn't believe him right away. And so just like Jesus not wanting his identity revealed, Caspian needed to wait until the right time. And that was when he was alone with this man. And Caspian guesses who the man is within 6 guesses. He is the man. He is the Lord Bern, the first of the lost lords. And Lord Bern can tell by Caspian's voice that he sounded like his father. Lord Bern made it here with the other 6 lords, but he happened to fall in love with someone on the island and didn't want to return to Narnia with Miraz still in power, and he was honestly just tired of the sea. So Caspian gets picked up by the Dawn Shredder as planned, and he and Bern are on deck and explain the whole situation to Drinian. They go to the other island of Avra, where Bern's estates are, and after dark they send out a messenger boat to Dorne to make some preparations. Lord Bern realized that Caspian doesn't know what he's doing in this situation, so he takes charge. He submits to Caspian as king, but he knows this situation better, seeing as he knew who Pug was and lived on the island. He understands the politics of the slave trade and has been trying to fight it. Bern bought people from Pug, but all the people that now work on his estates are free. He bought them so that they could be free. Lord Bern asked Caspian to order his men to put on all their armor, and in 3 boatloads they all headed out to Narrowhaven. The arrangements that Bern made the night before included a crowd of honest people to meet them. The kids of the neighborhood were jeering. The young women joined because Caspian and Drinian were so handsome. They all marched to the castle. More and more people joined them and greeted them, and they celebrated and recognized him as the king they had been longing for. And this procession to the castle feels a lot like the triumphal entry in the Bible. In what is about to happen, we will see that Caspian has so much confidence. Narnia needed a king to lead with confidence, and he fits that perfectly. Now, at the gates of the castle, they didn't want to let them in, even though they announced Caspian as king. So 2 of Caspian's men force the gates open, and they go inside, where the guards had their armor in disgraceful condition, and they had all been lounging. And they really didn't even greet Caspian that well, and to this, Caspian forgives them for greeting him the way that they did, but he commands them to be in better shape for tomorrow. And this kind of reminds me of God in a way that, he loves us as we are, and he forgives us for the things that we do, but he also wants more for us. He loves us as we are, accepts us as we are, but he wants us to do better, and he wants us to be better. And I think that just reminded me of that now. And the governor's name was Gumpas, and he told them no interviews. So Bern and Drinian flipped his table. Caspian tells him who he is, but Gumpas seems stubborn to believe him. They even physically remove him off the throne, and then Caspian sits on it. Now, obviously, flipping the table like this reminds us of Jesus doing that with the money changers. And Caspian demands explanations for 2 things from Gumpas. The first is that the islanders haven't paid tribute in 150 years. Now, in the law, if tribute was not paid, the whole debt had to come from the governor personally. The second thing was an explanation for why Gumpas allowed the slave trade, to which Gumpas said that they needed it, and that because Caspian was so young, he does not understand. But Caspian pointed out how the slave trade is not actually helping the economy, proving that even in his young age, he knows what's up. And Caspian is the king. He knows that his age does not mean a thing. So he demands that the slave trade stop. He gives Gumpas a chance to get his act together, and when he doesn't, he relieves Gumpas of his office as governor and instantly turns around and installs Lord Bern to the office. But instead of governor, he is now the Duke of the Lone Islands. And God does the same for us. He gives us a chance to change our ways, but he won't force us. It is still up to us to make that choice, and when we don't, there are consequences, just like Gumpas experienced. After this, they find some horses, and they ride off to the slave trade. At the slave trade, Caspian pardons Pug for laying his hands on him, back when they tied him up on Felamath, because he didn't know who he was at the time. When he then declares that every slave in the market is free. Now, at this point, Edmund, Lucy, and Reepicheep had already been sold, but they were still at the market, luckily. Now, the Calormans wanted their money back for them, so Caspian said yes and forces Pug to give them their money back. Now, I feel like maybe Caspian should have done a little bit more to them for buying slaves in the first place, and I don't know if giving them their money back was the right move either. But he did the gracious thing and was making peace with everyone, and I think that will always be the right call. And if he didn't give them the money back, it could have made the situation worse in that moment, because the Calormans could have started a fight or something. And so that was good for in that moment, but it may still happen later, as Lord Bern warns Caspian later that ending the slave trade may start a war with Calormen. And the funny thing is, nobody wanted to buy Eustace. Not even for the low price of 5 crescents or even for free, which I think really speaks to the kind of person that Eustace is. I think there is some symbolism in there that if you are just a nasty person with a nasty personality, nobody wants to be around you. So after being saved from the slave trade, Eustace was still ungrateful, saying to Caspian, "I see, as usual, been enjoying yourself somewhere while the rest of us were prisoners? I suppose you haven't even found out about the British consul. Of course not." Like, what is this guy's problem? Anyways, after ending the slave trade, they go back to the castle and have a feast. They were planning on leaving the next day, but at this point, they were leaving all known lands, and the unknown sea was ahead of them. The most skilled shipwrights looked over the Dawn Treader. There was at least another 28 days on the island, preparing to leave on the voyage. And during this time, Caspian talked to every sailor he could to find out what they knew about the unknown sea. The only useful and truthful information that he got was that they don't know what is out there. Reepicheep was on a quest to find Aslan's country and knew that it was out there somewhere and was excited about that. Now Bern saw the other 6 lords leave and have heard nothing from them or about them ever since. So he urges Caspian not to go. He's begging him. He says that he could use Caspian's help with the war that he foresees with Calormen. Caspian tells him that he made an oath to Aslan, and what would he say to Reepicheep? That's all the time we have for today, and what an exciting start to our voyage. We see Edmund, Lucy, and their troubled cousin Eustace join the crew, and they end up getting taken and sold at a slave market. Caspian finds the first lost lord of Narnia, Lord Bern, and together they overthrow the corrupt government, install Bern, and replace him as now the Duke, and they put an end to the slave trade, freeing Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, and Reepicheep. Most important, they gave the islanders of the Lone Islands hope that there was once again a Narnian influence in their region. Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you leave a comment and a rating. Let's make this year amazing for Faithful Fables and get the gospel out to more and more people. Also, don't forget to get your Christian bracelets at freeluma.com. Use code STAYFAITHFUL, all one word, capital S, capital F, to save yourself 15% on your order. And of course, join us next time as we leave the Lone Islands and go out into uncharted waters as we continue on the voyage of the Dawn Treader. And remember to always and forever stay faithful.